Welcome y'all. It's your boy Carcino here, and let's talk about it. This is the truth behind one of my favorite shows, The Jeffersons, the longest running black sitcom in history. Still to this day. Now, The Jeffersons, about a black family that was moving on up. As George and Wheezy went to that big old apartment in the sky, in a high-rise apartment complex in Manhattan, New York. He was a dry cleaning tycoon, had a very successful business. And because of this, George was always trying to make it and prove that blacks could make it and be in this society that was exclusively to the Caucasians, and wanted to prove he's just as worthy as them. And his family was. And there never was a show like this, a successful black family at its time. Black shows, they were always struggling and striving, and they never showed the success. The Jeffersons was the only show that really showed the success. And unlike Good Times, the Jeffersons focused more on real good times. So you got to see it from the other side of the glass. Now, when they went to make this show and create this show, this came up after a show that many shows were created from, All in the Family, with Archie Bunker. Now, during the 1970s, Archie Bunker had a neighbor that moved in the neighborhood, and it was a couple that lived next door named George Jefferson. Watching a play, in case you don't know who Norman Lear is. Norman Lear is like the guy when it comes to like making these television shows. He loves like All in the Family, Maude. He wants these shows to be gritty. Gritty to the core, like he wants them to tackle real issues. If you're not tackling real issues, Norman Lear is not going to be a part of it. That's not his wheelhouse. Norman is about tackling, let's talk about what's really going on out here in society. So Norman Lear is definitely somebody who's on the board of doing that. So on All in the Family, I mean, Archie Bunker was just as, old school as possible. Now, watching a play, he saw the character he wanted to be George Jefferson, to introduce the black family living next door who just moved in. So when this situation was created, it was a Broadway musical called Pearly. He had to wait in order to get that role. So in order to do that, they already introduced Isabel Sanford character as Wheezy to be the wife, and had her on the show and bringing Lionel on. And they had another guy play Henry Jefferson, who played George's younger brother, on the show. Now, Henry never was on the Jefferson. He was on All in the Family. And they were only putting Henry there while they were waiting for the play to be over so that he could bring, Sherman Hensley in to play George, because he said, that's George Jefferson. Sherman Hensley can play this character in his sleep. I want that guy to be George. So right off the bat, to combat with Archie Bunker, they had Henry in there going against him. And it was good and it was doing all right for itself. And things started to change. You start to see different developments happening with the shows. And you started to see the Bunkers was doing their thing, but you can tell that they were getting ready for a spinoff and create its own show. Norman wanted to do that, and he wanted to have this combativeness with Archie Bunker and build the characters up so people can get familiar with them so they could spin it off into their own show. And sure enough, as soon as they got George on the show, it was epic. Him and Archie Bunker having these debates. Now, when they went to cast, for the crew, Isabel Sanford was entirely older, like, than George. So they had to make Sherman Hemsley look older. She was born in 1917. Sherman Hemsley was born in 1938. So she was many years older than George. But they didn't portray that on the show. They just aged Sherman Hemsley up. So while they were both doing their thing and, living their lives and going through their characters, progressions, what you were seeing was a layout, a full layout of the characters' progressions, one after the other, after the other, after the other, of them trying to figure out how the Jeffersons was going to be cast, what was going to happen with the show. So I remember Ron Levitz, one of the executive producers, said, well, we don't want to just make a show where it's just the Jeffersons and, they're in this big high rise. We got to have other characters of diversity, like different people living in this high rise, that has some personality. So what they wanted was an interracial couple on the show. And this was one of the first prominent features of an interracial couple in history. And first, they had to find someone who was like okay with this. And Roxy Roker, they saw her and they wanted her and casted her, and they said, okay, um, your husband is going to be white. So we want to know that you're okay with this. See, back then, this is the 1970s, y'all. So you have to be okay with certain things that you're probably not okay with, but you got to be okay with it, and if you want to work. But they're gonna ask you because it's very serious. So they ran it by her. They asked Roxy Roker. They said, "Do you want to?" Do you want to go along with this? We want to give you the role. We liked you as Helen Willis, but your husband Tom is a white man. And they were, worried that she's not going to be okay with this. We might have to get another actress. So she opens up her wallet and shows them her husband. Her husband is Cy Kravis. Cy Kravis is a Jewish lawyer who's white. Once they saw that, she's like, my husband's white. It blew their minds. They never knew any of this, the producers, when they hired her. And they said, oh, okay, wow. And a side note, that is Lenny Kravitz's mother, in case you guys don't know or didn't know. Cy Kravitz is his father, and that's his mother, and there's Lenny Kravitz, and you know Zoe Kravitz. Lenny Kravitz dated Denise from the Cosby Show. They had a baby named Zoe Kravitz, and you've seen Zoe Kravitz in every movie and commercial that's out now. And this is Zoe Kravitz's grandmama. Now, in the Weatherman Al Roker, this is his cousin. So now we've got that covered. So they went and got the right guy to play Tom. Right? So they wanted to make sure that Tom and everyone else, Tom and Helen, this was going to be the other main cast. And these guys were going to play off each other. And George was going to play off the fact that, you know, he didn't deal with this interracial couple thing and didn't like it and was very standoffish. And he was the black version of what Archie Bunker was. Didn't see the hypocrisy, just old school in his ways, and he always at the see, you know, would always have to learn a life lesson. And their son Lionel is in love with their daughter, Jenny. And Mike Evans was the original, you know, Lionel for the show. They hired him, got Mike Evans to do the show, and he was the one on all, you know, like All in the Family. And he was the more, what, the one that everyone liked. You know, everybody liked him. And the thing was, sorry about that. While he was doing these shows, and he was doing the Jeffersons, where he played Lionel Jefferson. It was a contract dispute where he felt, you know, this isn't going the way it should go for Mike Evans' character who's playing Lionel. He had some suggestions, and he definitely didn't agree after the first season coming back about his pay structure. And he's like, look, Mike needs some more, we need to, you know, get some things going over here. Now, they had another guy come in to take his place called, what's his name, Damon Evans. Just so happens their last name was Evans. They're not related. And it was just going back and forth. And it was confusing at some points because after the first season, Mike Evans was like in a holdout. So for 3 seasons, Damon Evans played Lionel Jefferson. Then for the 5th season, there was no Lionel. Then for the 6th and 7th season, they went back to Mike Evans as being Lionel, which was very confusing. Then they just had the character like come in and reoccurring and for the rest of the season. It was completely weird and confusing. But they were never going to be a main couple when at first they were going to build the show up to have Lionel and Jenny get their own television sitcom. And this ended up hurting her career as an actress, the actress who played Jenny. and she was the daughter of Tom and Helen. And being a mixed child, she was going through being discriminated against by George, who was coming down on him for even dating her, for being mixed. Different times, people. Different times. Now, one of the glues in the first 4 seasons was Mother Jefferson. Whenever she was on the scene, the mother-in-law who loved her son George, never cared for his wife Wheezy. Now, Mother Jefferson eventually passed away, and that did, present a blow to the show, but they were definitely, she definitely set a foundation of being on the show and was hilarious when she was on there. Jenny was on the show till its end, but losing her main character status after the 7th season because of what was going on with her love interest on the show, which was Lionel, really hurt the program because now they couldn't do a show or spinoff. They just was being written off of the show completely. And what Ron and all the rest of these guys wanted to do was create a foundation of different characters. You had Mr. Bentley, who was the Englishman. You had Ralph, the doorman. He always coming in begging for money. You had, even though they had a reoccurring part, Charlie the bartender. You had all these characters that meant something. They were all different. So when you had Mr. Bentley that would show up, he negotiated in his contract that Mr. Bentley, as much as he would only have bit parts in there, he was a main character for the first 8 seasons. And then he came back and took a season off and came back for 2 more seasons after negotiating and being out for a season. I mean, Marla Gibbs, who played Florence, for the first 3 seasons, they had her as a reoccurring character before they made her part of the main cast. So the Jeffersons ratings were high every year. The Jeffersons stayed in full rotation every year. There wasn't a time the Jeffersons were slacking, and even if they were, they would pick right back up. They tried to do a spin-off show with Florence Henderson playing the maid of Marla Gibbs playing Florence. They tried to give her a show called Check It In. And then I remember it went like maybe 5, 6 episodes and they canceled that and they brought her right back on the Jeffersons. And last year they just did a play in which she was in it, Marla Gibbs, reprising her role, where Jamie Foxx played George Jefferson. Like I said, this show tackled a lot of different elements that wasn't being spoken about at the time. This is the first time before the Cosbys we seen a successful black family on television. And it showed that blacks weren't, we weren't afraid to see a family who was successful because there were black people who were successful. But we just never saw them portrayed on television. Back then, there were plenty of black people that owned businesses and lived in nice homes, and they weren't all in the projects. They had nice businesses and nice homes and lived in nice areas, and they lived like normal people, just like everybody else would. But that image wasn't being portrayed on television. Now, what was weird is that when they were coming to the end of it, or where they were gonna, CBS was getting ready to make changes. The Jeffersons had become old to them. They're just like, well, after the 10th season, they really didn't want to go into negotiations for an 11th season. There was no, like, we are thinking of pulling the plug or nothing. After the 11th season was done, they kept it to themselves that they were going to just end it. So they didn't even give the Jeffersons, the longest running black show in the history of mankind, its final show. Didn't even give it a final episode. They were all under the impression that this was coming back. Now, a lot of people might not even understand or remember or even know how George got his money in the first place to open up the business. George Jefferson was in a car accident where he won a civil action suit for like $3,200, and that opened up his first store in Queens. And through that, he started operating at least 5 stores, cleaners through New York City, and he opened another 2 during the following seasons of the show. So he had like 7 dry cleaners that he was running, which made him a very wealthy man. Well, I was just like, I miss the Jeffersons, man. When it come on, I watch it from time to time. George was so real, and I could see what made them go ahead and get George. George was that glue. He was that glue. They did a rating of about what, 27, about 20 some million or whatever, or 21 or 22. They about average that since they've been out. The Jeffersons was just one of those shows. And season 8, they was in 3rd place. After 8 years, a show goes from 4 to 20, 24 down to 10 to 8 to 6 to 3. Never before have that's really been seen. Then around seasons 9, 10, and 11, they started to taper down a little bit, but that's because CBS was getting ready to try to move them out and bring in something new, something fresher, feeling that it ran its course. So, anyhow, if you like what you heard, definitely check out the Jeffersons. I know most of this is past your time, but it's definitely out there. They got the shows in syndication. It was a great television series. You learn a lot from these shows, and they help inspire television shows such as The Cosby Show that you enjoyed, and a lot of other shows like the Wayans Brothers. You guys love that. This was inspired by the Jeffersons. A lot of things was inspired by this show. So, anyhow, I'm out. Thank you for listening. And if you want to support the page, please, by all means, hit the Cash App up. My name is Carcino on the Cash App. And definitely, you can hit the donate button in the description box and leave me a message in the Streamlab. Thank you very much.